we're back for another episode of Standpoint. It's a special episode. As you can see, I'm not in the regular Rumble studios in Miami. I am in Israel in the beautiful ILTV studios in Rishon LeZion. I'm here with my family for Passover, for the Jewish holiday of Passover, our spring break, our version of spring break. It's a critical time in Israel, so I couldn't pass up the opportunity to sit down and speak to some of the most interesting and forward-thinking thought leaders in Israel on the issues that are going on today. And with that, it's such an honor to welcome Amir Avivi into the studio. Amir is someone who I consider a friend. I've admired him and his work for many years. Amir is a brigadier general in the reserves of the IDF. He is the founder and chairman of the IDSFL, the Israel Defense and Security Forum. In Hebrew, it's called the Habitchonistim. It's a movement and a think tank of over 30,000 Israeli officers focused not on politics, but on security. What does it take to secure the state of Israel, the borders? Let the politicians speak about politics, negotiate whatever they want, but let there be a clear voice on security, and that's the purpose of IDSF. And it's such an honor to have you with me here today.
A pleasure, Gabe. Thank you.
Amir, your last position in the IDF was the head of auditing and consulting, which, amongst other things, what you did in that department, as I understand it, was preparedness and understanding the preparedness of the IDF. I'm not a military expert, but after October 7th, it seems the sense is that the IDF really wasn't ready for the attack that came in from Gaza. It's hard to understand from the outside why it wasn't ready or if it wasn't ready, but it really felt like it got caught by surprise. What are your thoughts based on your previous position?
Well, one of the things I talked about a lot when I was handling the readiness of the IDF and the defense establishment overall is the tension between readiness and long-term build-up of force. There is a tendency in the last decades in the IDF to really focus on high-end technologies which cost a lot of money and take time to procure. Sometimes you cannot even procure many capabilities because it's very, very expensive, and sometimes it's done at the expense of readiness, meaning at the expense of the amount of munitions you have, at the expense of the amount of parts you have, and also at the expense of how many units you have. So one of the things we saw in the last 20 years is the IDF moving to high-end technologies, and by doing so, reducing the amount of divisions and brigades, the amount of munition. And I remember one instance when I was speaking to Benny Gantz, he was the chief of staff, in a gathering of many, many officers, and I said to him, listen, Mr. Chief of Staff, you know, war is a physical dimension. When war starts, all you think about is how many forces you have, how many munitions, how many parts, how much fuel, how much food, and how many armored bulldozers. That's it. And I don't see in your planning a focus on that. You know, it's all about cyber, it's all about high-end technologies. Now, I'm not saying we don't need high-end technologies, of course we do. But it seems that the IDF went out of balance in balancing these two things, and this is affecting the way we are fighting at the moment, and the time it takes to reach all the missions.
It's interesting from the outside, you know, when the communities around the world that support Israel, and there's many, despite what we see in the media, everybody was scrambling to help the IDF, to send helmets, to send vests and different elements. And many of us were thinking, how does the IDF not have this? We've had a period of relative calm in Israel. It's never fully calm. There's always at the brink of a war. It's just the reality of the region. And it's what you're saying actually seems to explain it, where the focus wasn't on traditional warfare, but was instead on this sort of modern cyber warfare.
Yeah, cyber, air defense, things that, by the way, are important. But it's all a matter of balance, how much you take a risk on your readiness. Readiness is also helmets, equipment, munitions, and so on, and how much you invest in a long-term build-up to really keep up with, you know, other big challenges like we saw in the Iranian attack, you know, like missiles and rockets and UAVs and other issues. I think we're not balancing it the right way, and we should have understood that because already in 2014, we fought 51 days in Gaza, not a war like now, a much smaller scale, And we saw that there was an administration not willing to help us with munitions. And we had different issues with munitions at that time. We should have understood that we need to invest more, not only in the army, but also in our industries, our capability to produce our munitions and our needs to sustain war, because we see that no matter how right is this war, I mean, we were massacred, and still we see what kind of international pressure we are dealing with. We need to be much more able to really fight depending on our capabilities and less on outside help.
Yeah, what's interesting is when we in the U.S., we just passed, U.S. Congress just passed a big military aid bill for Israel, which is obviously incredibly important for Israel to be able to continue to prosecute this war and be ready for the next one if there's one coming. But there is obviously another side to that coin, which is because all of it, or the majority of it, needs to be, I think it's up to 95%, needs to be spent in the United States. It actually diminishes Israelis' defense industry here and increases American, which is great for the American economy, but then it makes Israel fully reliant on the United States. It's not like they can produce it themselves here.
So I think that when you talk in an ordinary year, we're talking about $3 billion aid, sometimes 4, depends on air defense aid. Looking at the overall Israeli budget of today, not of 30 years ago, it's not such a big amount of money. It's an amount of money Israel can invest in its own industries to create jobs, to create more independence in our capabilities. So I think in the very long term, we need to think about a different kind of relationship. Yes, America is our biggest ally, always will be. We need to stand together as a Western civilization against all these threats. I'm not sure that aid, in the long term, this is the right formula for this kind of relationship. I think we need mutual projects. We need to do a lot of things together. But aid creates a kind of dependence I think the Jewish people shouldn't have in the long term.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a difficult discussion to have in the sense that we, the Jewish community in the United States and Israel here, work so hard on getting the financial aid and military aid from the United States. So to make that change, which I agree with you.
I would rather have investments. I would rather have mutual projects. I mean, we do that with other countries. And even if we wouldn't get aid, I would say that the U.S. would fund anyway a big part of this because of them wanting us to procure from the U.S. the capabilities, such as the Germans fund a third of our submarines. Why? Because the other option is buying the submarine from somebody else.
Right.
And Israel needs to be able to procure from more countries. It needs to be able to strengthen its own industries. We have to find the right balance in this sense.
I hear people talking about that a lot. I know you're not in politics, but in the political side, I don't see anybody doing anything about that. A lot of talk, but I haven't seen anyone try to figure out how to, in a way, decouple from the United States, from the aid perspective, like you're saying, and increase sort of as partners.
You know, the reason is simple. There is no long-term vision. People are dealing day to day. You know, we in IDSF, everything we talk about is Israel's security for generations to come. We think 20, 50, 100 years ahead. What is the future, the vision of Israel, talking about its national security and ability to exist? And today's politics, people, you know, think about the next week maybe, you know. Right. There is no long-term thinking. And in long-term thinking, you can say, okay, we cannot cut aid in one day, but, you know, let's do a 20 years program and steadily move towards a more independent Israeli state as our economy grows, society grows, and so on. You don't need to do it in one day, but for this you need vision. Right.
So how have you seen Israel, the IDF, prosecute this war so far? From the outside, we're seeing lots of different stories on that the war has been effective, it's been ineffective, we've pushed everyone to the south, and it seems like we're stuck now with not just the civilians in the south, but also Hamas and also the hostages. How do you assess Israel's prosecution of the war so far?
So from the 8th of October, a day after this terrible day. I think that the moment the IDF went on the offensive, we see the Israeli soldiers excelling in combat. In every single encounter of Israeli units of the IDF with Hamas, the IDF had the upper hand. We completely took over the northern part of Gaza, which was the strongest stronghold of Hamas, the strongest brigade. We attacked all the north part, which is a really complicated area. It's a very dense urban area, and destroyed the northern brigade and the battalions, then extended the war to Khan Yunis. In Khan Yunis, the IDF attacked with one division with 7 brigades. I don't recall in the history of Israeli warfare 7 brigades attacking simultaneously in the same place.
How many soldiers is that?
It's around, I would say, 20,000.
Wow.
20,000 soldiers. And after a week or two, Goldfuss, the division commander, understood that if he won't fight inside the tunnels, he cannot win, because all the terrorists are hiding, thousands of them, inside the tunnels. Also, the leadership is inside the tunnels. Our hostages are inside the tunnels. And the IDF, in no time, developed techniques how to fight in the tunnels to overcome booby traps, improvised explosive devices, blast doors, and the enemy inside. And we conquered tens of miles of tunnels under Khan Yunis, destroying Hamas above ground and underground, extending this warfare also to the central camps. And Hamas retreated. It retreated to Rafah. And Rafah is their last stand. This is why there is so much pressure on Israel not to go into Rafah. When we go into Rafah, Hamas will be destroyed as a governmental and military entity. We'll reach the hostages. We'll be able to secure the Egyptian border. The victory is in Rafah, and this is why it's so crucial for us to go and finish the job.
Why haven't we gone into Rafah so far? Is it purely political, or is there a military reason?
Both. There were military reasons, there was international pressure, there is all the discussions about hostage deal that has been going for a long time. I share the view of many of my colleagues that we should have gone long ago into Rafah and defeat Hamas. We have to understand that winning against Hamas also affects the north. We decided that we'll be on the offensive in Gaza and only on defense on all other fronts, and only when we finish with Gaza, we'll go north. So this is affecting also all the tens of thousands of Israelis displaced. They don't know when they'll be able to go home.
In the northern border.
In the northern border. So we really need to move forward. One of the ways you handle warfare is continuous pressure. If you don't pressure all the time the enemy, they have time to organize, and then it's much harder. And we're not pressuring continuously. We're stopping, we're doing deals, and so on. And this is prolonging the war. It endangers our ability to win, because we see international pressure growing steadily. And if we now wait again with Rafah, who knows what will happen in a month or two.
What will it take to win in Rafah?
Just the cabinet saying to the army, go for it. That's it. The army is fully ready with 2 divisions. All the plans are ready. All we need is to give an order to the army, and they'll get the job done. In a few weeks, they will destroy Hamas. Hamas understands that this is their last stand. They are preparing for that. It will be a fierce fight. But we saw all over Gaza, everywhere the IDF attacked, we took over the area and destroyed Hamas. They cannot stand in front of the IDF.
So this week we're looking at an imminent deal, or what looks like an imminent deal. We've had a lot of these imminent deals. From where I sit, just as an observer, a commentator, it looks like Hamas sees that and is trying to do everything it can to exert diplomatic pressure on Israel to not go into Rafah. They've tried with the United States, they've tried with Europe, and they've gotten everybody to voice their opinions for Israel not to go in. Today, the Prime Minister said, we're going to go in no matter what, with or without a deal. But the question is when, right? Not if we're going to negotiate a deal and then go in another 3 months. It continues again, like you say, to endanger our soldiers. Can you talk a little bit about what you know about this deal? The details seem to be amorphous. They keep changing from what you can read in the media and what you think about it.
Well, I understand that from our demand to release 40 hostages, we went down to 33. I understand that Israel intends to keep the northern corridor and let children, women, and people at the age of 65 and above to return back to north of Gaza, but not militants, not Hamas, not at the age of fighting. Some people are talking about a full retreat from this corridor. A full retreat is devastating. I'm really hoping that this is not the kind of decision.
And just to explain to the listeners who don't understand, as I understand it, there's a corridor dividing the north and the south of Gaza.
Basically, when we attacked the northern part of Gaza, we moved more than 1 million people from the northern part to the southern part, to the central camps and to Rafah and Khan Yunis. And in order to prevent them from coming back, we took over a whole corridor, which is Netzarim corridor, where Netzarim settlement was at the time, along the Gaza River. And we are securing this corridor in a way that prevents from people to go back north. And when you don't have people in the north, it's much easier to operate there. We saw it in Shifa, when the remaining terrorists wanted to reorganize, and they went all into the hospital, into Shifa. It took the IDF 15 minutes to cross all of Gaza, surround the hospital, kill 200 terrorists, and arrest 500. So the ability of maneuver, to move from one place to another, to raid, to continue to destroy the infrastructure in the north, which is huge, it will take years to destroy it, depends on us not bringing the people back to the north. So this is why they kept this corridor in this way. If we are going to give this up, especially when we are not getting all the hostages, this might be very, very problematic, and this will endanger Israeli soldiers later on.
There's a lot of talk about what all the hostages means. On the street, people are saying that there's only 30 to 40 hostages alive. People are saying different numbers. Do you have any insight to that? Or
I think there are more alive. I think almost half of them are not alive, but it doesn't matter. When we talk about hostages, we talk about everybody, also the bodies of soldiers and the citizens, not only alive. We have to bring them all back. Hamas will never, ever give them all up. They will keep hostages alive and not alive, and therefore the only way to release them is militarily. It's going into Rafah, destroying the leadership of Hamas, and releasing the hostages. And this can be done.
Yeah, I was glad to see, to that end, I was glad to see, in the United States you don't see it, but in the Bring Them Home posters, they include some of the hostages that they've been holding since before, like
of course.
The ones that they've been holding since 2014 and 13. So one thing that's been surprising to me and almost disheartening is, and tell me if I'm right in this sense, it seems like in Israel, I've only been here a week, there's almost been a politicization of the Bring Them Home movement versus the End Hamas movement. It seems like the Bring Them Home movement is sort of bring home the hostages at all costs, almost anti-war, versus going and finish the job militarily to bring them home. And it was hard for me to understand that, because from where we sit in the diaspora, those things go hand in hand. We're going to war to bring them home, right? We're going there to bring home the hostages and to end Hamas together. Here it seems like it's one or the other. Am I right in sensing that in society today?
Yeah,
here?
You're right. I think that the vast majority of the society understands that it goes hand to hand. You have to destroy Hamas and bring the hostages. There is a certain group which I feel also is a lot motivated politically, that says we have to release them at all costs, which is saying to the Hamas, yes, the way to win against Israelis is taking hostages, is kidnapping people. And this is a huge mistake. And I think that in the middle of a war, the society should be united and focused on victory. And victory is also bringing our hostages. But it's not going to happen without us destroying Hamas, certainly not all of them. I'm also worried at this stage that Hamas might try to take hostages out of Gaza. We might find hostages in Iran if we don't wake up and do the job and go into Rafah. It might happen. So I don't understand people who say at all costs. I mean, yes, hostages are critical and important, but they are not more important than the overall society. They are not more important than the need of Israel to win for everybody, for Israel and the Jewish people. We cannot endanger a whole society because we want to bring back hostages. We cannot endanger soldiers in a way that is not reasonable because it's all about the hostages. It's not. It's about winning the war. And yes, part of the goals of war are to bring all our hostages back. And the way to do it is continue the pressure, attack, destroy them, and bring the hostages.
What's incredible, but people have to understand is, as you're speaking, I'm thinking about, is the ethical and moral quandary that Israel is in. Because, I studied philosophy many years ago, almost more than 20 years ago. And when you study ethics, they come up with these crazy questions that you would never think would happen and say, okay, what's the ethical thing to do when you talk about utilitarianism, right, for the greater good versus this, and you go through the scenarios. This isn't in a philosophy classroom, it's real life and it's real people's lives, and they're not easy questions. And I'm happy there's people like you actually thinking through it in a way to try to get to a reasonable answer. I know you're not
by the way, there are many families of hostages that think exactly what I say now, that have organized and are saying, finish the job, go into Rafah. There is no one voice of hostage families. There are hostage families who say the good of the whole country is more important even than our sons or family members. And there are others that say, no, we have to release the hostages at all costs.
And my hope is that decisions are made by the people who make the decisions for the right reasons and not thinking, like you said, in 2-week increments or 2-month increments, but what's good for the state of Israel and for the overall security for the state of Israel moving forward.
I was in the south now, in the Negev, and as I was driving, I went to Ben Gurion's burial site. I stood in front of his tomb, and I made a video saying, we are living in a Ben Gurionistic moment. We need a Ben Gurionistic leadership that, can stand in front of the huge international pressure and also internal pressure and do the right thing for the people of Israel. And the right thing to do is win. The right thing to do is giving an order to the army to go into Rafah and win decisively, because this is the only way to create the terms that can bring us also the win in Lebanon and against Iran. If we don't win against our smaller enemy, our most weak enemy, then we become a prey for all the Middle East. And not only the Middle East, the whole globe. Israel needs to stand strong and say we are going to do what's right for us and win this war.
Tell me why a couple weeks ago when Iran attacked Israel overnight, over 200 projectiles, missiles, rockets, drones, etc. From the outside, we were most worried about at the same time while we were watching these missiles fly over slowly, for the amount of time it took, that the timing was going to be as such that as they were going to land, Hezbollah, God forbid, was going to unleash their own missiles at the same time to put Israel in that position. Why do you think Hezbollah didn't do that? And can you explain a little bit how Hezbollah is sort of playing every day? They shoot a couple rockets here and there, but they seem not to be all the way in. Can you explain a little why that's happening, or why you think that's happening?
When we talk about the overall situation, we need to look at it from an Iranian point of view. Iran's strategy is to have the proxies fighting for Iran. They don't want to fight directly. And if they give up Hezbollah and Hamas, they will be completely exposed to an Israeli or an Israeli-American attack. So the Iranian interest is to keep Hezbollah intact as much as possible, certainly when they are not yet a nuclear power. And therefore, from the very beginning, from the 7th of October, they kept Hezbollah intact. They said, okay, we'll try to shoot Israel from many different places, but not create a full-scale war, which might bring to the destruction of Hezbollah or to the destruction of the nuclear program of Iran. This is the strategy. This is why Hezbollah is not all in. But if they get to the conclusion that war is imminent, and after Israel wins against Hamas, Israel will attack Lebanon to destroy Hezbollah, then they might act differently. Try to attack preemptively or do something different.
Can you, we're kind of running out of time a little bit, but we're talking about the north a little bit. You spoke about bringing back the displaced people from the north. All the residents of the north of Israel have been displaced because of all the rocket fire from Hezbollah and imminent war. What does it mean to bring quiet back to the north, other than pushing them back behind the Litani River? Is that the objective?
So this is definitely the objective, because citizens are saying we're not going back. If we have Nukhba on steroids in the form of Radwan forces on our borders, we want them out. We're not going to take the same chances that their citizens in the south took, and one day be attacked by surprise. How do you take Hezbollah out of Lebanon? You can do it in two ways. One, it's diplomatically. For this, you need huge international pressure. For this, you need the US to be willing to pose a credible military threat on Iran and Hezbollah, to be willing to fight, and pressure them enough to push them outside of South Lebanon.
Yeah, Biden has proven that he's not going to do that.
Yeah. Now, winning against Hamas and destroying Hamas is also a good motivation to get them to do it diplomatically. But the way it looks at the moment, I think that the chances of a war in the north, of Israel needing to go into South Lebanon to destroy Hezbollah in South Lebanon, the chances are high. And if we do that, that would be probably a full-scale war, which might also spill to Iran. Now, the US is going to elections. The one thing Biden wants is quiet. But in order to stabilize the Middle East, you need to show power and be willing to threaten Iran. Without that, there will be no deterrence, and they are not deterred. So the chances of war are high. So I would say that in a way, the administration is doing exactly the opposite of what it's supposed to do to stabilize the Middle East. It's not enough to talk about a peace agreement with Saudi Arabia. The whole idea of a coalition is really building a military force that will counter Iran and Hezbollah and all this Shia axis. And you need to project power in order to really stabilize and change the situation.
So clearly there's a lot of complexities. And also, as you're talking, all I'm thinking about is, thank God the United States passed the foreign military aid package now, because...
Definitely, and we're very thankful for that.
Yeah, because the war is going to continue, most likely. We'll see what happens this week, whether if there's a deal or not a deal for the hostages. It sounds like that's not going to be the end of the war anyways. So anyways, thank you so much for your analysis. Thank you for your work. I've heard from the team here, from Tom and everybody at ILTV, that you've been nonstop in the media in Israel. And like I told you before we started, I hope to hear you more in the press in the United States, because your insight on the technicalities, people need to understand. That's why these podcasts are so great, because people need to understand really what's happening from a military and strategic standpoint if they want to really have an opinion even of what's happening. So thank you so much. And I pray for peace to Israel, peace through strength, and hopefully your voice is heard throughout the state and the government and the IDF for us to get there, for Israel to get there. So thank you so much. Thank you everyone for listening. Thank you ILTV for hosting us here in your beautiful studios. Everyone make sure to like and subscribe and do all the great things you do. We'll be back in Miami next week. Thanks so much. Toda.
Thank you, Muslam. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.